sooner or later I was always going to give in to the curiosity on this one. Today we are talking about a book that went truly viral on its release in 2023. It is a romantasy novel, and it is none other than the viral hit sensation, The Fourth Wing. This is by Rebecca Yarros, released on May the 2nd of 2023, and this version comes in at 498 pages long. This is video 1 of 2, specifically this is the review video. If you've seen my review videos before, we will do the normal thing of looking at, first of all, the story, then we'll move on to the characters, the world building and the presentation. Then I'll give you my thoughts at the end on whether I think this girthy book is worth your time. Spoiler alert, I actually think it is. So, with all that out of the way, let's have a talk about it. So this book right here is a fantasy romance novel, and this is set within the fictional world of Navarre and primarily set around Bezgayath, which is a military fortress where they train future dragon riders. And the story is, with the exception of the last chapter, told from the point of view of Violet Sorrengail. Violet is a young lady, 18 years old if memory serves correctly, who is the daughter of one of the major military leaders of the Dragon Riders, specifically the one that was responsible for the death of the head of the last rebellion. Now, Violet was originally not meant to be a Dragon Rider. She has a medical condition, which I will mention in the character section later, which means that she was more suited to becoming a scribe, which was her father's wishes. However, her father is no longer around, having died previous to the story, and her mother has decreed that all her children will become Dragon Riders. Violet is the youngest. She has, or had, two older siblings, I should say. One, the older brother Brennan, has passed away, according to the story, and she has an older sister as well. And this story documents her, first of all, going into Bezgayath to become a Dragon Rider, and her experiences of training and dealing with all the various issues she has while she's there. As she is very distinctive and quite hated for the fact that she is the daughter of the person who killed the leader of the rebellion. And part of the reason for that is that the children of the rebellion leaders, as part of their sentence, they were to become Dragon Riders, as there is a high fatality rate of people in this training. This is a school that would not pass health and safety inspections, to put it mildly. It's more deadly than Hogwarts. And it covers the whole sort of process of her getting into the school, going through her lessons, and figuring out ways to get through her tests, as she is physically not as able as a lot of the other people who are there due to her medical condition. But this is obviously complicated by the fact that you have the incredibly good-looking Xaden Ryerson there. Now, he is the son of the former rebellion leader and probably wants her dead. And this is where you have the enemies to lovers tropes coming in. Now, she does have allies in there. Most specifically, you have Dane Atos, who is another person who has relatives within the military and was a close friend of Violet growing up. And they have a bit of a thing going on. You kind of have a friends to enemies thing going on with them, but we'll get into that a bit later on, potentially. Who's trying to smuggle her out and get her into the scribes before her mum can realise. But Violet is determined to prove that she can do this. And as the story moves on, you have the burgeoning romance between herself and Xaden. You have the falling out between her and Dane Atos. On top of that, you have various little bits of world building going on in here. There's a suggestion that maybe not all the information that's coming through to the school is accurate in terms of what the jobs of the Dragon Riders are, or how the magic is working. And then, of course, you have the point where he has to bond with a dragon, as the dragons are the ones who choose who they bond with in this. It's not up to the people, it's up to these guys, the dragons. And there's some twists and turns with that as well, before it gets right to the end of the training and they're sent on a mission which turns out to not be what it appears to be. Now, a lot of the criticism I have seen for this book online has been by massive fantasy fans, and I can understand why the criticism is there. In many regards, this is a very, very tropey book. You have magical tattoos, you have dragon riders, you have almost like a chosen one trope in some regards, as certain things happen during this that are beyond normal, that only seem to happen to Violet. You have political corruption. There's a lot of stuff going on here that you get in a lot of other fantasy books, and this book does them all adequately. It's very much a case of throwing everything at the wall, which is part of the reason why I think this has been so popular. On the flip side, you then have the romance options, or the romance tropes, I should say, and there's quite a few of them here as well. Enemies to lovers, friends to enemies. You have forbidden love, as obviously you have almost like a blood feud between the two families. You have a different power dynamic, a bit of an age gap as well going on between Xaden and Violet as well. But what this means is that this close to 500-page book never lets up. And although the story is quite tropey, it's nothing you haven't seen before in any other fantasy books, it does hit the tropes with a level of competence that means that you do still get drawn in, and it acts as a really, really good structural framework for the romance story that's being told here. Because one thing that fantasy historically is not great at is doing romance. So overall, I think this is a solid story. I don't think it's particularly original, but what it does well, and it's well told. So let's talk about the characters then, and we'll start with the main point of view character, who is Violet Sorrengail. So Violet, first of all, is the daughter of a major military leader, and that does play into a lot of the issues that she faces, especially due to the fact that at the school she is at, there are former traitors and rebellion children there, which obviously harbour a bit of a grudge. On top of that, because she is very distinctive in her looks due to the almost white hair that she has like her mother, she does get singled out, as is often the case for children of really, really famous people. It becomes almost like a yardstick to kind of measure yourself against. Now, as mentioned in the initial intro into the story, Violet was originally training to be a scribe, and she is a very smart character. And this is important because she has a medical condition that means she isn't actually as physically able as a lot of the people around her. Whilst it is never outright stated in the book, I believe it's a form of EDS, or Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and this is a condition that affects your body's connective body tissue. So what you have here is someone who really, physically at least, has no part being within this very, very specialised school, especially when you consider the fact that the school in this book has a very high mortality rate. Not everyone makes it through just getting to the school, let alone through the lessons themselves. So you've got somebody who, first of all, has a target on their back, and secondly, is most definitely not physically capable. So in this situation, what does Violet do? She uses her scribe training and she tries to think her way through problems. And this is a consistent thing through the book. And along with that and her bloody-headed stubbornness, which is the best way of putting it, she is really consistently written. A criticism I've had of, for example, Selena Sardouthian in the Throne of Glass series is that there's multiple times where her characterization feels at odds with some of her actions, as she is displayed in a certain way, and then she'll make a decision that does not fit her character. In the case of Violet, that's not accurate. She is shown to be fallible. Sometimes she makes misjudgments. Sometimes she makes bad calls. But you can always see the thought process going on there. She is very smart, she's very driven, and she can see things that others can't. On top of that, you do have a couple of tropes around her specifically, as some things go on later on in the book to do with when she's actually bonding with her dragon, which are unique to her and sort of alter the status quo of the world as well. On top of that, she realizes she's incredibly attracted to Xaden Ryerson, and she knows just how dangerous that attraction is, but she just can't help it. Very much a case of you can't help who you're attracted to. But she also has attraction for Dane Atos, who is a childhood friend who she's known for many, many, many years. And this all plays into a rivalry situation going on between, especially Ryerson and Atos as well. Now, past Violet, obviously the person who gets the most characterization here is Xaden, and initially he appears as the typical Violet, dangerous, brooding bad guy who has got it out for Violet. And over the course of the story, it becomes clear that there is far more hidden depths to him than you would initially think, and he has his own set of motives. And again, he is very, very consistent in the way he is written. He's very secretive. Obviously, he's not very trusting, as he wouldn't be being the child of a rebellion leader. But he's consistently accurate to his character. Past those two, there's only a handful of characters that really get much time in here. One is Violet's sister, who I think is called Mira, if memory serves. She's not in it very much, but she cares deeply about her sister. She's very much an elite dragon rider. You also have Dane Atos, who is a bit of an ass, if you're completely honest. When you look at Atos and you look at Ryerson, they have a very different approach to dealing with Violet. In the case of Ryerson's case, it's get up, do what you're supposed to do, you can do this, whereas Atos is very much, oh, you shouldn't be here, you can't do this, let me help you, let me save you. Very much a white knight complex going on there, which actually helps drive Violet away from him and closer to Xaden. Now, there are some very spicy scenes in this book as well, it's worth mentioning here, as Violet and Ryerson do fall head over heels with lust with each other, but it is very, very well done. That being said, is any of it especially original? Again, not really, but that doesn't really matter, because what this does that so many other stories do, especially with certain strong female protagonists, is that it gets the consistency of the writing and the characterization there. This isn't a case where Violet has had a really traumatic experience that's forcing her to be this strong person. She is this strong person because she is this strong person. She doesn't need the trauma in her backstory, although there is some of that here. That isn't what's driving her. That's just a part of who she is, not the reason she is who she is, which I really do appreciate. So overall, strong character work, if not necessarily overly original. So the world building in here is actually surprisingly clever. So first of all, you do have a map, which we do like our maps. We do. Yeah, it's a very basic map. We're based around here at Bezgayath in Navarre, and there are issues which we're told about in other parts of the world, specifically with griffin riders, because dragons are not the only magical creatures. And we also learn various bits to do with the magic. For example, the borders of Navarre are actually magically warded, and that magic is given to the riders by the dragons. And this is why the dragon riders are so important, but also why the dragons have such a say in who they bond with, because they only want to be bonded with the best. And this has some very, very subtle world building. Just little, almost throwaway things to do with a book of fairy stories becomes really, really important later on, as it turns out that possibly the government has been withholding information. There is a very light commentary on here on book banning. There are various books that are banned by the government and are sequestered away in the vaults of Scribes Quarter that not everybody has access to. And I think it's worth mentioning that, considering the absolute apocalypse that's going on in the US right now with book banning. The other thing that this does really well, however, is setting out the rules of how magic works. Magic corrupts unless it is gifted from a dragon or a griffin. And there are differences between the dragon and the griffin magic. Dragons gift you a sovereign power. Griffins give you gifts. And these creatures are not necessarily enemies to each other, but they represent different countries and are therefore kind of enemies themselves. And there are no griffins within Navarre. But what it does is it sets up the rules for how that magic works. And then when it breaks those rules, you realize that it's a big deal. And that's something else that a lot of novels don't get right. They don't set up the rules properly, so you can't get the impact when the rules are broken. And this does that really, really well. Now, past that, you don't get a sense of what the normal world is like for the normal people, but you do get an insight into how harsh and hard the training is at Bezgayath specifically. And we do actually have a map here of Bezgayath as well, just to give you an idea. And it is horrifically tough, and these are the best of the best. Like I said earlier, there is a mortality rate which is acceptable, and it's also mentioned that over time there's been less and less people passing to become dragon riders, which is also important and something that I think will play into the later books. Past that, you have little bits of lore and history that are mentioned, specifically around the rebellion and what went on there, but again, a lot of that feels like propaganda. You also have a commentary here on military intelligence and how military intelligence is not always reliable to everybody that's given it, because they omit details because they don't want it falling into the public domain. The other thing as well that this does, which is really, really interesting, is how it handles the dragons, because the dragons are the ones that get the controlling choice on who they bond with. If they don't want to bond, they ain't gonna bond. If you're not worthy, they will just eat you or cook you. So some people just don't get picked. As a character in here called Liam, who was passed over for being bonded despite being one of the best in his year, although he does have the option to go and try for a second time. And that's really interesting because you get a sense that they have their own sort of dragon council and they kind of rule themselves, and they're not willing to let people, humans, have full access to their own knowledge. So it does make you wonder what else is going on behind the scenes with them. Overall, I would have liked a little bit more general world building, but Violet is a unreliable narrator due to the fact that she is the daughter of a military leader in a country where information is highly controlled. And I think that's very important, especially for her personal character arc going forward as stuff becomes revealed. So overall, I actually do think that whilst a lot of the stuff in here is seen elsewhere once again, it is very well handled, consistently done, and when it breaks its own rules, it does it in a way that makes it a big deal, and I really appreciate that. Presentation then, and we've already looked at the maps in here. Obviously, it's quite a striking front cover, which is then continued in the follow-up book as well. It tells you a little bit about, you've got the various symbology on there, which I would suggest is probably magic related. You have the dragon, they're at the centerpiece of everything. The title is Fourth Wing, which is the name of the unit that Violet is a member of, or is a member of at least during the story for her training. And obviously you've got a sort of gold effect. I would have liked it to have been something more on the inside rather than just blank, but this is not a special edition. I have a suspicion I'm going to be getting the special editions later this year. Now, in terms of writing, this is very fast-paced, it is very consistent, and I will also say that a lot of the chapters do finish on not so much cliffhangers, but they end on a dramatic note, which makes this a one more page sort of book, which I really do appreciate. It's pretty fast-paced, it's reasonably unrelenting, and even when you do get to sort of grab your breath, it doesn't last for very long, and it holds your interest really, really successfully. Now, I can't talk about this book without talking about the spicy scenes, of which there is a few in here. I think it's chapters 30 and 32, and Yaros has previously written a number of novels in the romance genre, some of which were actually military romance as well, which sort of informs some of the bits in here, and boy were they well written. Yeah, I don't have a huge amount of comment to make, but they were very well done, and they did perfectly catch the lustful nature of the relationship they were in at the time. Now, past that, you also have a chapter near the end of the book that I want to talk about. In terms of the audiobook, it was about an hour long, and it was what I will call the fight chapter. And it was frenetic, kinetic, fast-paced. It felt like there were high stakes. It didn't feel like people were going to get out alive, whilst also giving you some more information about the world that this takes part in that you were not party to throughout most of the book, and that was really well done. And actually, for me, that was the best chapter in the book, the actual battle scene near the end. The prose in general is not overly floral, it is not overly descriptive either, but it does get enough across for you to be able to envisage what's going on, especially in the moments of action, regardless of what type of action that is. So overall, I think this is a really strongly written, very briskly paced novel that really does hold your attention, which does have the little bits of maps and so on and so forth in there as well to help give you a sense of the world. So my final thoughts then. Is this the 4.61 that it currently sits at on Goodreads? And the answer to that is no. This is a solid fantasy book which has good romance in there, very good spicy scenes, and an excellently written battle scene at the end. But this is far from the most original fantasy novel you will ever read. It is filled with tropes. If you've read any amount of fantasy, you will start to pick them out one by one. And I think that's part of why you see a little bit of criticism of this from people who are fantasy fans, because fantasy fans quite often do like certain tropes and dislike others. And this has nearly all of them in there. So you're going to find some that you like, some that you don't. But this is aimed at a slightly younger audience of people who may well have not read a huge amount of fantasy, which makes this actually quite a good gateway into the fantasy genre in general. On top of that, this is a solid enemies to lovers or rivals to lovers romance as well, with a bit of unrequited love in there, a bit of danger. You have very much the brooding bad boy image for Ryerson, and you have the fact that you have Violet looking at him going, I want that, but I probably shouldn't have that, and then still acting on it. So overall, I gave this a 3.75 out of 5, or rounded up to 4 on Goodreads. I do recommend checking this one out, actually. And also special mention for the audiobook. The audiobook was excellent. I cannot for the life of me remember who it was that narrated it. I will put it on the screen though. I'll check it after when I'm in the editing process. But yeah, that's my thoughts on this book. I've already picked up the second one. It's even chunkier than this one, so that's going to be fun. I'm going to do another video after this one discussing why this has got so popular and why it might matter more than you think. So if you're interested in seeing that, keep an eye out for that one coming out. But what I would like to know is, have you read this one? What did you think of this? Let me know in the comments below, and I will catch you all next time.